Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another APSAD Insight webinar. I think it's the third in the series, and thank you all for joining us. I hope it's something that's being beneficial for everyone's clinical practice. My name's Jim Hunt. I'm one of the nurse educators here at Insight. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which I'm standing on today. I'd like to pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, and I'd like to extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders that might be joining us out there in webinar land. So thank you. And to everyone, welcome. And I think we've got a bit of a treat for you today. It's something a bit different to our usual presentation. We've got some people from the Ladders team that are going to talk to us about a new peer workforce that they've set up at Ladders. For those of you that don't know, Ladders is the Logan Adolescent Drug Dependency Early Response Service. And I'm not going to tell you a great deal about their service because I'm pretty sure that will come across in the presentation. The people we've got speaking today are Gude, Gemma Nevin, and Mdt Cheeseman, who are part of the peer support team there. And without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to them. But please, whilst they're talking, if you can kindly type any questions that you might have in the chat section of the presentation, and then I will read them back to the presenters at the end so that they can respond to them. So without any further ado, over to Alan, Gemma and Matt. Thank you.
Morning, I'm Alan.
I'm Gemma.
And I'm Matt.
Yeah. So thanks for joining us this morning. I'd also like to acknowledge the audience and all the great work they do in the AOD space, and also like to acknowledge anyone that's had previous struggles or current struggles and whatever sort of struggles they might be. So we're going to have a play. So look, who are we? We're part of Metro South Addiction and Mental Health Service. Ladders is an early response service, so catering to the 12 to 25-year-olds that are direct or indirectly affected by substance use. Only been around since about 2017, but we are the first alcohol and drug service in Metro South to actually have a dedicated peer workforce, which was pretty exciting, and it's been a journey for us, and that's probably what we want to highlight today, just our journey that we've gone through. The original team was a combination between clinical and peer. So we had a couple of CNCs, a couple of allied health, a couple of peers, a part-time doctor, and admin. We sort of did what we call a reverse engineer. So we tried to create the model based on the staff we got and on what the community needed at that time. So we sort of got a lot of information from other services around and what they were doing and how they were doing it, and tried to create what we could do for our local community. If we go back to the beginning and have a look at our workforce, we had a combination where people had involvement with the peer workforce before, and we sort of had peers that had actually no alcohol and drugs previous experience. We had clinicians that had worked with peers from other services in the past. We had clinicians that had no experience working with the peer workforce. We had peers that had the AOD, but from a strategic and organisational sort of perspective. We also had a clinician that actually worked in a peer-led team as well. So we had a real mix of people that were with our service. If we went back to some of the thoughts, so what we did, we went back and spoke to some of the different people that were there right at the beginning. And if we had a look at some of the thoughts from them, and it was probably in some ways the peer workforce was seen as a support. So they were there to support the clinicians and not to run individual interventions. So so in some ways there was this thing, if it's not clinical work, you know, what do you do? You know, there was this idea that maybe it was a bit tokenistic, you know, sending out the peer to represent all people that were using alcohol and drugs or had mental health. So in some ways, there's probably a real lack of understanding of the peer role. There was also from the peer, there was sort of some of the previous experiences that some of the peers had, which they brought with them. But overall, there's probably this above and below the line. So between the clinicians and peers was probably some of the comments we got back. From our original team leader, when we went and had a chat to her about what was going on back then, and probably it was, in some ways, it was some of the difficulties around recruitment and whether we recruited the best people for the position at that time. But remembering we're doing this reverse engineering, so we sort of learned a lot from that. And it was probably trying to build this role to the person rather than developing the role and finding the best person. There was these concepts around boundary and scope of practice, and there was some fears that came with that. And I remember a story from years ago. There was an allied health person that worked in an opiate replacement clinic, and the nurses got to the point where they felt that having an allied health in that space was actually challenging their clinical practice. And so this is not a new thing, and it's not between peers and clinicians. It can be between clinician and clinician. So there certainly was this lack of understanding of the role of the peer by the clinicians, and also the lack of clear identity of the peers. So it was a two-way street back then to try and work out, what everyone was doing. There was these fears around professional boundaries and registrations, and that idea that, if one person did this, does it reflect on the other person? So there certainly was some fears that were within the team, and which is probably normal when you're setting up a team as well. So concerns, what were the peers actually doing? Yeah, and there was also then concerns associated, did they have the skills and knowledge? Once again, lack of understanding. Once again, she saw the tokenistic side to it. But there was also another one where there was some triggering events, which she wasn't aware of with one of the peers, that working with certain people was actually triggering for them. So that was something that hadn't been taken into consideration as well. So in hindsight, what we really, sort of looking back, and this is probably nothing astounding, but it was about, there was that lack of that role clarity and really not a shared vision at that point in time, probably guided a bit by personal beliefs rather than the team vision. The idea about recruitment, I think in hindsight, probably could have done better in our recruitment process. The whole thing about the role developed to the person rather than recruit to the role. And the big thing about managing the staff anxieties and working together. So certainly by looking back, gave us a good opportunity to think about how to move forward, was the big thing that we were looking at. So if we went back and had a look at the start and what was our Mdt model, it was certainly hierarchical. So where we had the doctor at the top, the clinicians next, and the peers down below. So it certainly was a hierarchical sort of model. That changed at one stage because the doctor went on maternity leave and of course couldn't get backfilled. And when we sort of talked about what do they really want, what the team really want in that space, a lot of it was associated with risk management. They wanted someone to hold that risk. And if we're talking about young 12-year-olds, and their high risk behaviours, it is quite fearful for the team to sort of think about what could happen. So there was a big thing around that risk management. The way we got around that at the time was certainly sort of shifting that, saying that the risk is held by the team and it's held by the policies that we use. So with good risk screening, with that sharing that information, it was actually about the team looking after that person in the best way that we could. So if we look at where we were, it was certainly a hierarchical model. Where we are now, it's a very flat sort of model that we've brought in place. And that's probably what we're trying to get to today, is how did we get to this multidisciplinary team where all staff, no matter who sat at the table, has actually got an equal say in the process. And I think we've done it. Yeah, okay, cool. They're nodding their heads, that's a cool thing. Okay, so if we had a look, if we go back, it's about this, the anxieties and the role understanding. And the big thing is, do you really know how each person or each discipline works? If you look to the person beside you, do you actually know how they work? Do you know that this is how a social worker that's in your team works compared to a social worker in another team? So if we had a look at our staff back in the start, so we had a medical officer, very good with their child youth and mental health, but didn't have the experience around the AOD area. We had a psychologist came on board, very good in the alcohol and drug space, and had probation parole background. We had another psychologist, had the alcohol and drug adult service and kids helpline. We had the peer that had the strategic AOD framework experience, but then we had a new peer to this work. And we had a clinical nurse consultant that came from a school-based youth health network background. So had that sort of that idea, and adult alcohol and drug service. and had another one that came from the adult alcohol and drug sort of space. So we had a bit of a mixed bag, and with each of them, they brought their own set of skills and their own sort of the ways that they used to work, and it was about how do we get them all together to work together. Sorry, I couldn't see the bottom of my screen then. This was a question that I've asked different times throughout my career when I've been on panels, and it'll be that to say, well, why would I employ a social worker instead of a psychologist? Or why would I employ a clinical nurse instead of an OT? And it's interesting over the years how some people can really nail that question because they've got such a clear identity of their own discipline, where others have got very much a generic alcohol and drug perspective. So the reason I would ask this question is because someone, if they're a social worker, for instance, they should have a really good frame of practice to say, this is how, as a social worker, I work. As a psychologist, they should be the same. So, and as a peer, they should have a clear understanding saying, as a peer or a carer, this is how I work, this is a framework. So they've got a really good understanding of how they work, why they work, which then they can sell to other people. I'll throw it to you guys. So the idea is, which of us are the peer? I mean, can you pick a peer worker? Off you go. Sorry, we're making this up as we go along. So.
Hey, I'm put on the spot at this moment. I wasn't set for me to come up next. Okay, basically, as a peer worker, I work from a lived experience. So I try and encourage young people new to the service that there's no judgment here. And all of the staff are like that. There's no judgment. Try and put them at ease and yeah, just open a doorway for them to step in and maybe start to engage. It's about building relationship. Yeah.
I guess as well, which one of us is a peer worker? I think when we have young people walk into our office and I, meet them at the front, they don't know that I'm necessarily a peer worker. It could be Alan that goes and introduces themselves. So I think it isn't peer workers don't look a certain way. You can't really, there's no way to differentiate, there we go, between us. And I think the next question is that if you've ever worked with peer workers from different services, have they been different? So Matt and I were both peer workers here, and we do work completely different in the same service. So Matt probably has more of a connection to culture, and he uses that often with the people that he works with. And for me, a lot of mine is about creativity, and that's what I kind of use. But yet we still work in the same service, but we're very different people, and we work differently with the people that we work with.
We work with our strengths. So we're focusing on what we're good at and where that relates with the individual that's come in. We target where we can work with them best, and especially if it's something they've identified as wanting to move forward in, and yeah, we walk alongside them and work with them that way, strengths-based.
Yeah. And as a response of going back to the interview question, the way Matt and Gemma responded to that, I mean, there's a truth, honesty, and they know what they're doing, and that's the important thing, because if they know what they're doing, that they can sell that to the team. And that's the important part. And I think also sort of this whole idea that a peer worker is not a peer worker. It's such a diverse group of people. I mean, running from, all the peer workers that work in that, say, in AA, NA, that support that they give back to the community, right through to the recreational use where they are supporting that community. So we've got peer workers that are working with alcohol work, with peer workers that are working with injecting drug use. So it's such a diverse group, and I think that's one of the important things. Because they're such a diverse group, we need to understand as a team how we work together. Which comes back to the whole thing. I mean, you look at the person beside you and they might be the same discipline as you, but they're working very differently to you, even though they've got the same discipline, same sorts of training. This is an interesting one, because we're sort of saying, there's this Dr. Kevin McCauley. I mean, and he's got some videos and things that are out at the moment, and they're quite good. But he actually struggled with his addiction for many, many years, and so he went in search of the reasons why, and coming to an understanding for himself. So the question is he a physician or a peer, or both? Something to consider. Also, I mean, for us, we've all got our own stories, and we bring those stories a little bit into our workspace. So where do we sit in relation to peer carer, clinician? How do we balance that? And the question is, can you be both? And certainly that's an interesting area, and I've worked with peers over the years, and some have moved. We've gone from their peer work and done studies and moved into psychology, nursing, social work. But I've also had people who've done that study and are applying for jobs in the peer space. So I suppose, I mean, can you be both? But I suppose, what is the difference?
I guess the real difference comes down to the role that you're sitting in. Like, we're all people, you take away our job titles and we all have stories and we all have experiences that we go through. But I think with peer work, you're in that identified role where you can really draw on those experiences and share them with people in a really personal way. And I don't think, sometimes in other roles that is, is possible. And there might be more restrictions around that. But in my opinion, I don't think that you can't draw on your own experiences and use them in whichever way you can in your discipline.
Yeah, Gemma hit it on the nail there. We're an identified role, whereas someone who might be a clinician and they've had lived experience might not be able to say they've had lived experience with a young person directly, identifying themselves, but they have that understanding and they can work with the strengths that they've learned from a lived experience and, of course, their role.
And I think that's right. I mean, because myself, I mean, I've got my own story, which I don't bring into my clinical work, but certainly with that, I've got an understanding. And I think it's, in some ways, it's what the skills or the strategies you bring to the space and how you're sort of working with somebody does change depending on the role you're in. And that's the same with nursing, psychology, social work, OT. There's a whole range of different ways of doing this. So, but it's nice to acknowledge that, that people do sit and they cross over here. They could be in both sections. I think this is interesting when we start looking at similarities in the work that we do. And I know I love this model. This is what Matt works from. And do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, sure. This model here is just something I've worked from for many years now. Worked with it in probation and in the prisons and domestic violence and, of course, peer work in Australia here. It's a model from home where I'm from, and it's called Te Whare Tapawha, and it's a model of overall mental health and well-being, and it portrays a meeting house on a marae back in New Zealand. In the meeting house, it's very sacred to New Zealand Māori, because that's usually where we have a lot of our sacred things that are precious to us and to family members that have been passed on down. And so they're all stored in these places, and huge gatherings take place inside these buildings. And the four main poles that hold up the house, they each represent a certain part of a person and society and health. The first being te taha hingaro, which is your mental health and well-being, emotional well-being. So it looks at every area that pertains to making your mental health strong. So all the things that you feed your mind and make you feel good, that are healthy and life-giving. Also, you have your taha tinana, which is the physical health and well-being pertaining to your whole body. What do you do to keep your whole body healthy and well? Te taha wairua, spiritual health and well-being. My culture, we're very spiritual people, and we know that to be strong spiritually, it makes you strong physically as well. Well, it opens up doorways to being able to be strong physically. But it also, if you tap into that spiritual strength in our culture, it takes care of things that you can't normally see, but you can sense them. And te taha whānau, which is your overall family and health to the family. So yeah, we look at these four main areas of, is very important in the culture, and they're transferable to all cultures, most cultures, and they represent a person. So if we see or observe one aspect that's lacking in strength, we target it and try and encourage that area in the person to help them start to rebuild that area in order to, get that full health and well-being back. It's like in the natural, if the house was damaged on one side, it's exposed to the elements and things can get destroyed. Same thing with the human, with a person. Any one of these areas that are damaged, well, it leaves them open to other things and to weakness and unhealthy. Yeah. So I'll just leave that with Alan.
And listening to that, I mean, and clinicians sitting there listening to that, hopefully you sort of think, oh, wow, I do, some of the strategies I use are very similar. And the good thing about this is really, I know working with Matt, it's really cool because Matt might see somebody first and he's spent some time with them and says, hey, Alan, can you see them as well? I can follow from the model he's got. He can also then, if I've seen someone and I've identified one of these pillars needs some work, say, hey, mate, can you do something in the space? So it's actually, we're using a similar model. We're just using different terms around it because let's use a healthy mind platter, which I'm guessing a lot of people use from Stan Segal, and it's this mindfulness stuff. And the thing is, if you look at some of those areas, they're very similar in relation to that model that Matt was talking about. You talk about 4 columns. People have that 4 L's. That's been around forever in this space. So there's similarities, and I think that's probably the bit to start looking at is the similarities. 4-column diagram. This number 4 keeps coming up. Coincidental? Don't know. But the idea is, it's when you start understanding how another person works, you can truly work together in that space.
And that's very strengths-based, isn't it?
Yeah. And then if you talk about it from a strengths-based model, that certainly works. That we're looking at the strengths, we're looking at those 4 pillars, those 4 parts of that person to where do we need to do some work. You can also think, sort of looking at recently, and the happiness register in Bhutan, and you have a look at some of the things in that, and they've got these things in there as well that they use to say, how do we keep the happiness of our country? These are the things that we value most. I did have a slide on that, but I pulled it out, unfortunately, now that I mention it. Sorry about that. Look, if you Google the whole idea about the diversity in the workforce, and you look at that, and you'll come up with all these things where they talk about the strengths and the barriers. And I don't know if this comes up very clearly, but you can have a look at some of the challenges, because there's certainly challenges when you have a diverse workforce, but there's certainly lots of benefits. And the idea for us is those challenges is what we were looking at, So, the whole thing about employing people from other cultures. So sometimes their voice is not heard. So the idea is, how do you make sure their voice is heard? And that's something we'll talk about a bit later on, but how we brought everybody's voice into the MDT. Another one down here, sort of the whole idea about, by having that diversity in your workplace, by having that true multidisciplinary team, it makes it easier for troubleshooting and making decisions, because you're getting that real variety of ideas that helps. And ultimately, we're here for the client. So that's probably the big thing, is that gives us the opportunity to get the best for them. And probably the big question is, what are the benefits, challenges, and barriers that, what we brought to the table? And we just, we were very clear about this, and we did work around trying to do something about some of the barriers and challenges. So what do you bring to your multidisciplinary team in relation to benefits, challenges, and barriers? You may have been doing the same thing for a long time. It's always nice to stop and have a look at it and rethink. Over to you guys.
So what is peer work? I guess at its core, peer workers work from a lived experience background with substance use. And we use the lessons, I guess, that we've learned throughout our lives and through our experiences to benefit the lives of other people. And we share what's worked for us and maybe what hasn't worked for us in the hopes that that could be used by somebody else. You can be the button person. So how do we actually work? We probably hear a lot that we have the fun job, and we do, but there's always a meaning behind the fun. There's a purpose to the fun. So I can't talk to what all peer workers do because, like Alan said before, it's a very individual role and it changes over, what service they're in and the person. And it also changes between the age and culture and the lived experience of the person who's sitting in the role. So I can talk to how me and Matt work. So we love to do with, not for people here at Ladders. So an example of this might be a young guy might come in and say that he used to be really into football. However, since substance use, he no longer plays football because of his fitness levels. And if this was something that he really wanted to get back into and to engage with, we would actually set our next appointment out at a football field and we would kick the ball with him and do different things. We would do that in the hopes of reigniting the passion for that sport and using that as a motivator for change. We support and implement strategies with young people and we use what's worked for us. So we always kind of draw on the experiences that we've had and that have been beneficial for us and pass that on to other people. That's not saying that everything that's worked for Matt or I is going to work for a young person, but it's also about, working with them to find what works for them and doing that with them. So if that means that a whole appointment will be set to, colouring in or doing some, stretching and things like that, then that's what we will do with that person. A lot of what we do is based around, setting goals that the person wants to achieve, that they identify as something that they want to reach. And a big one, I think, for Matt and I as well, is we love to be out in the community and to have links with different organisations. So an example of that is I work with the YMCA every second Wednesday, and I just go in on a Wednesday afternoon and sit in on their free classes. That might be dodgeball or art or whatever they're doing at the time. But it's really just to be a familiar face and to be a part of, their team as well. So that if a young person does want to have a chat with me around substance, that they are able to have those conversations. And I think it is a good way too, that if the person was wanting to engage with Ladders later on down the track, that when they walk in the door, they can be greeted by a friendly face, someone that they already know. And it might take that anxiety away from that, because especially for our young people, coming into a service can be really scary. And you don't know what you're walking into most of the time. So having somebody who you're familiar with when you walk in can take a lot of that anxiety away. And lastly, but surely not least, is we advocate for our clients. So we always try and keep a lived experience, like a lived perspective on everything that we do, and bring that to our meetings when it's, when it's appropriate. But a big thing is teaching the young people that we work with to really advocate for themselves and teach them skills to do that. Anything you want to add to that?
I guess just getting back to the fun factor, you can never have too much of it, especially from...
Are we paying for this?
I'm really thinking from a lived experience here, and remembering what it was like not to have fun. And so one of the best medicines in life is that real enjoyment that you can get out of life. It's not, it's not that degrading kind of enjoyment some people might get. It's real life-giving enjoyment. So yeah, just giving a big pump for that kind of stuff, because I know it works. Yeah.
So we touched on it a little bit earlier, just about really knowing your role and how that is super important when you're working in an MDT. So I can't expect the clinicians that I work with to know what I do and what I don't do in my role if I don't know my role for myself. So I've just put up a little slide there, and that's really just about things that I draw on when I'm working with a young person. So again, things that have been helpful for me that I've used, and areas that I, you know, maybe target with young people as well. So Matt is, like I said earlier, you know, cultural and loves sports. Me, I love a bit of creativity and craft and things like that. So yeah, just making sure that in peer work, especially, that you know what your framework, I suppose, is, and what you draw on when you work with people.
And I guess just on the lived experience side of things again, I know identity has always been very helpful working with our young people, because they lack their true identity. They lack an understanding of who they are as a person, because, you know, what lifestyle they're living. So it's about showing them, helping them to discover who their identity is, and what to aim at, what to aim for, and what not to accept in life. Yeah.
And clinically, it's quite nice when they come to us and say, oh, this is what we've been doing with this young person. For instance, colouring in, and they might do the colouring in, and then they come and talk to a clinician and say, oh, well, that's one of the grounding techniques. And say, oh, that's what grounding means. So then you can actually then build on that, because, you know, there's so much jargon in the world, and this sort of gives the opportunity that they've done it already and say, oh, now here's some of the benefits from it. So that's a lovely way that we get to work together. Or with kicking the football around, saying, well, you know, you can put some of your worries in one of the balls and just kick it. So you're throwing your worries away and things like that. So there's lots of opportunities to work together, so to build on that.
Yeah. So why do peer workers and clinicians work well together? So in my opinion, I think if we want to provide the best service for the people that we're working with, I think a real, you know, wraparound approach is the best way. If you can have somebody who has a lived experience sitting in a room with a clinician, you know, you've got both perspectives for that young person. They can, you know, a clinician may suggest something, but a peer worker might have actually tried that and does think that it works for them, and they can kind of give it that backing as well. And I think it just kind of really makes a space for a personal connection, all while working together. And I guess we do that here often with, you know, our case conferences, and we share caseloads here too. So Matt and I will work with clinicians with young people, and we work as like a partnership with each other for the best outcome for the people we work with, and every morning as well. So like I said earlier, we bring that lived experience to the table when it is needed. And yeah.
Yeah, look, I'm just remembering a whole lot of times when I've been working with a young client, a young person, and I've needed the support of one of our clinicians. Might have been a nurse, might have been a psychologist, at those important moments when, you know, I didn't have the strength in that area, but I knew who did. And so they were right there on hand to offer that support. And it's worked vice versa as well. Yeah.
So me and Al were having a chat about doing this webinar a couple of weeks ago, actually, and he was explaining this basket weave idea to me, and I thought it was a really good way to visualize how peer workers and clinicians work together. So when we do work together with a young person, we have to make sure that even though we are working parallel to each other, that we are connecting and you know, intersecting and working towards the same goals together. I guess an example of how we would do this would be, I remember I was working with one of our CNCs, Emma, and I was working with a young lady. And Emma had, you know, spoken to me about how this young lady was really struggling with some frustration and anger. But the young lady had also said to me that she used to be super into art, but it wasn't something that, you know, she had an interest in anymore. So the next time I met with her, we went down to a local park and we filled water balloons full of paint, and it destroyed our outfits and we were covered in paint. But we just threw these water balloons at canvases in the park, and it was really nice because, you know, she was having so much fun, but you could tell it was a good release for her. And then she ended up coming back and leaving the canvases with us here at Ladders, and a couple of days later she came in and asked to take them home because she was really excited to show her family the work and the art that she had done. So for me, it was kind of a release for her. So she made art out of her frustrations, but it was something that Emma was able then to use with her moving forward. It was an activity that she could draw on in her work, and that's kind of where we met with that together. Another example, I guess, with that as well, I was working with another young lady with one of our social workers, Lil, and I was sitting in a room, and this young lady was talking about an experience that she had, and she wasn't able to really put, words to the experience, and she wasn't really able to explain how it made her feel, what it was like for her. And I remember sitting there in the room, and it was something that was super close to something that I had gone through. And I just said to her, I was like, hey, listen, tell me if I'm wrong, but, it feels to me that we've been through something that's similar. Did any of it feel like this? And she was able to like, oh yeah, that's it, and and we had this conversation back and forth about this experience, and it kind of changed from being this really hard thing for her to talk about to this conversation that we just kind of kept going with. But having Lil in the room was a really good way for her to be able to get a clearer idea of what was going on for this young lady, and to be able to get a good picture of it.
Yeah, I had an experience just yesterday. One of our CNCs asked if I could come out and meet a young person, and he just hadn't. He's had a very traumatic background, and it was something that I could relate with. I was able to get buy-in. He's also been wanting to get a healthy routine together. But everything he's tried, he said he just gives up. He just can't do it. He listens to negative voices telling him you can't do it, and he talks to himself that way as well. So I just explained a few things to him, understanding his lived experience a little and relating that to some of the steps I had taken in my own life, and was able to talk to him and tell him how we could work through this together. And he was very keen, and he's booked in the next 3 or 4 sessions. I think he's coming in 3 days a week at the moment. So yeah, so that's still work in progress, of course, but yeah, we have a lot of experiences like that where we can work together.
Look, and this basket weave concept, that's something I stole from the Kiwis many years ago. So, just another one.
I'm sure that if you have worked with peer workers before, or heard of the peer workforce, a lot of what we do is about sharing our story. And it does play a huge role in what we do. However, I think it is very important to know the power of the experiences that we have gone through. And I feel that sometimes you run the risk, if you overshare your story or you share it too often, that it loses its meaning to you. So I think it's very important when we're sharing our story as peers that, it's good to keep in mind, why am I sharing this story? Is this for my benefit or is it for theirs? So if I am going to, disclose something from my life, I always keep one of these 3 things in mind. So is my story going to motivate change? Is it going to inspire hope for this person? Or is it going to educate this person? If it isn't doing, one of those 3 things, why am I really sharing my story here? So just a little why and when. So why or when a peer worker would refer, to a clinician if we were working with a young person. So I've just put down some things there, just that if we thought a young person was at risk to themselves or to others, if they were struggling with their symptoms more than usual and the usual strategies that they were using weren't really helping as much as they usually do, or they weren't open to trying some new things. If they wanted further information and education around substance use or doing some relapse prevention, or if they wanted to move more into the side of counselling and things like that, that is when we would go in and we would ask a clinician to take over or to work alongside us with that one. When we were actually planning this webinar, I sat down with the team and I asked the clinical team, if you're in a room with a young person, what is it going to take, or when is that moment that you think that this person would benefit from having a peer come alongside? And some of the responses I got were that if they thought a person needed a situation or a feeling kind of normalized for them, if they could benefit from seeing somebody who's gone through experiences and provide hope that, you know, recovery or change is possible. Some young people, especially in our service, are a bit resistant to services, and they may find it easier to connect with someone over a lived experience, or if the person required a different approach. So if the clinician thought that the young person would benefit better from maybe being outside of the office and doing activities outside with the peer, if that would be more likely to engage them, that's when they would bring us in. So we sent out a bit of a survey as well, and asking all the previous staff of Ladders and CAFU 8, you know, in your opinion, do peer workers and clinicians work well together in Ladders and the CAFU 8 team? So there's some of the responses there on the screen. So yes, most definitely, very well. It's a collaborative framework that holds the client at its center. And I think they've come a long way and they work really well together and could be improved. Who do you think the could be improved was from?
Okay, I'll put my hand up for that. And the reason I did that is because we can always keep evolving and keep moving, and we'll keep moving as we learn more information and as we sort of work with more and more people. We'll sort of, the insights just change. So I think it's always nice to keep pushing ourselves that we can improve. And I'm probably a bit of a shocker at team meetings because I will ask questions. A lot of time I don't know the answer to the questions, but I'll ask the questions anyway to get us to think about it, because you know, it's important work we do, so we should be really serious about it, and we should just keep asking the questions.
Yeah.
And it could be improved because we're always getting new clinicians coming in sometimes, so they haven't worked with a peer worker before in the AOD in our sector. So yeah, that's something to look at.
Okay, probably one of the big things, how did we get to this point? And it really was when we were doing our team meetings, and you know, we'd say, well, what do you think? And we really encouraged each and every person at the team meeting to actually put their 2 bob in, because I mean, they all had something to say, and it could help us sort of get a better idea. So a lot of time, and I always look at it like as a jigsaw, and there's all these pieces to be put together, and sometimes there's the pieces are missing, and that's trying to find the missing piece to help us understand what's going on. But it certainly was very much about, at the team meeting, taking the time to have the conversation, so that we're actually, once again, giving the individual that's coming to us the respect that we're going to listen to their story, even though they're not there to tell it at that particular point in time. So it was our responsibility to be able to tell that person's story, so that we can work out, is there other things we can help them with? And I think, you know, as the team became more comfortable in their own understanding of their own roles and how they work, they were then able to sell it to the rest of the team. And early on, I remember one of the staff that joined us, and really experienced staff member, and we did ask her for a question on one of the tables, and she said, oh wow, and she'd worked in the space for a long time. She said, I'd never thought about that. And then she actually was able then to give extra information, which was really lovely. I mean, and I think she came up afterwards and it really helped her to expand on the way she was working. So the big thing is that, you know, that basket weave idea is, as we knew how each other worked, by having the conversations at the meeting, we were actually then better able to work together for the benefit of the people coming to see us. The big thing is, I mean, you know, each clinician has to get to, and peer worker and worker has to get to a point where they can sell their role. And I think if you can sit in front of like a year 9 class, or a young person say, this is what I do in my role, then you've nailed it. But if you sort of struggle at that point, you've got some more work to do. And it was very much, we used the term, so everyone's sitting at the grown-ups table, so everyone's got to say. And did it work? This was something that came from one of our students, because the students that come and see us, they're part of our team and they're also put on the spot as well. So, and we're doing it in a nice way, I mean, because we want them to learn as well. But this was a comment from one of our students, you know, she really appreciated having that opportunity to actually be acknowledged as somebody that was part of our team. And that was in a 2-week placement. I'm not going to read that because I can't. Okay, so it's more than the team. And I know people have come in aware of the Stretch to Engage project that came out from the Mental Health Commission. If you haven't, go to their site because it's a really, really good process. The reason this is important is this also brought the individual and the community into the multidisciplinary team. So through the Stretch to Engage, it's very much about the design and co-design, but it's also about trying to make sure that the voice is heard. So the big thing was this being really curious, constantly questioning, and Julia, who was our community engagement person at the time, really drove this. And the good thing was she really pushed with the questioning and really made us think. And I think that was a really important thing. You know, sometimes you'd feel like, but it was her sitting there saying, no, hold on, what really is what we're trying to get at? So she really pushed, and Matt was part of the pod as well. And I think
very stretching.
Yeah, yeah. And that's the thing, stretch to engage, and it does stretch you. So, and it's about trying to really be clear and creative, but it's pushing you to think about other ways of doing things, but trying to think from their perspective as well. When I say their, that's the whole community, not just the individual. So to be a true MDT, it's about how do we bring the community into our MDT as well. So it's not just a clinical process. The other one is, it's the environment as well. So from a work environment, that's part of, that sets the scene as well for that equality in the MDT. And I don't know if people have done the 15-step challenge, but if you haven't, I'd really recommend that you do this. Very simple. It came from a mother in England that said that she could always tell what sort of care her daughter would get in a hospital ward within the first 15 steps of walking in there. We do this a lot here at Ladders, where the whole team will just walk outside, close the door, walk into the building, and the idea is, what do you see? What do you feel? You know, when you're walking into that space, is it going to be company? Is it a space that you're going to be willing to share your stories? Is it a space that you're willing to start making changes? Is it a safe environment for you? You then go through your counselling rooms as well. A lot of time, if you sit in some of these spaces and take the time to look around, there's lots of triggering things in these environments. And we've sort of done it multiple times. And I think Gemma's got a story around this.
We were in the process of redoing one of our appointment rooms, and I had put up on a wall all of these quotes that I thought were really, motivational, and I thought it'd be really, engaging for the kids in the room to have on the walls. And I brought Alan into the room, and I was like, "Oh, look at my work!" Ooh. Thanks, Jim. And I was like, "Oh, look at my work," and Alan's like, "Oh, it's very good, but that one there could be a trigger for somebody." And to me, that didn't even register. I was looking at it from a completely different angle. But it was really good that Al and me were able to work on that together, because it was both of our perspectives to get the outcome that I think we really wanted.
And this gives you, by doing the 15-step challenge, it gives you the opportunity to constantly create and change the environment, because for what's triggering for one person, it's quite inspirational for somebody else. So it's one of those things that certain things that we do are going to be really beneficial in one area, but may not be in somewhere else. I'll put things up. Actually, I drive my wife mad because I like a little bit of disorder, and I like odd shapes, and I'll do these things where she likes order. And when we put things up on the wall, sometimes people put them up in all this nice order, which is great for some people. But then if you put them up in a different order, and if someone's got more of an obsessive sort of personality, something being out of place in that line could be quite frustrating for them. And then suddenly they come into your counselling room and they're wound up like a spring because of that. So for us doing this 15-step challenge is actually trying to make sure that our environment fits with our multidisciplinary team. So an MDT is not just about the people sitting around the table, it's about the environment, it's about the community that you bring in there as well. So I think that's probably another way to look at it, making it a bigger picture. Then, of course, you get the individual. I mean, they're coming to see us and they've got all these different sort of expectations from us, you know. The idea they want to see a psychologist, you know, and what am I going to do? Lay down on the bed and tell me about your mother, you know, those sort of ideas, you know. So different people will come and have different perspectives. You know, if you've had a bad experience with a psychologist or social worker, by simply saying you're a psychologist or social worker, straight away you could be, you know, you could be on the back foot. So, you know, certainly between medical, nursing, allied health, the peer, the carer workforce, and the cultural workforces and other workforces as well, people come with an expectation of what they think they can do. I think Gemma went and had a nice experience yesterday in the expectation of a peer.
Yeah, so I don't think we're immune to this expectation either. So I was sitting in one of the rooms yesterday, and one of our clinical team introduced me to a young girl. And the first thing she said when the door was opened was, "Oh, you're the lived experience worker." And I was like, "Yeah, hey, I'm Gemma." And she's like, "Oh, so you're the one that's done all the drugs." And I was like, and she just said to me, "If you haven't done crack," sorry, quotation, then you won't understand me. You won't get it. And I think, you know, she had the expectation walking in that my situation and my story would be the same as hers. And, you know, unfortunately, we don't always, you know, meet people's expectations, but often we excel over them. So I think it's just we have to learn ways to let them know that we might not share the same experience, but doesn't mean that we can't help.
Yeah, I had the same. I had the same experience with a young meth user, except my outcome wasn't as good as Gemma's. However, the fortunate thing was we had a clinician who got on well with the young lad, so was able to support in that way.
Certainly after that experience with Matt, we, as a team in the morning meeting, we did an activity where went around and said, well, you don't have children, how would you know about parenting? We went around and had all these scenarios. For each person, we threw a scenario to them, which was completely foreign to them, and got them to think about how they'd respond. But then also think about what sort of response would you like to have if you were asking that question. So it was a nice way of looking at how we respond in those situations, and also thinking about other ways we could respond. Sorry, we're running out of time, I just noticed it. But has it changed for us? Oh, back one. Oh no. Sorry. There you go.
Yeah, so have things changed in the peer workforce? I think Ladders is a really good example of the change that, you know, is hopefully coming into all of the services where peer workers work. So me and Matt, we do have our own caseloads here. So we actually have services who refer directly to Ladders for peer support. You know, we do peer-led groups outside of Ladders as well, and you know, outreach into the community. We co-facilitate groups with clinicians as well. So, you know, I'm a part of the Gude program. Matt's a part of the men's group.
Yeah, the restorative justice. So work with PCYC, and also run half a group with mental health services with the adult wellbeing team. So we've got mental health and AOD working with a mixture of clients, consumers there. Yeah.
And we also do all of our own documentation and things on Simmer and all our own notes. We are a part of doing a lot of resource development. And, you know, I think now, well, I've been in the Ladders team for just over a year now. And definitely I feel a lot more secure in my role and who I am as a peer worker and what I do with people, you know, since coming into this role. And I think that is a huge part of, you know, why we do work well here as an MDT, because we do have that identity as who we are as peers. But a lot of it as well is, you know, the equality that we have between us. We sit at morning meetings and you cannot tell the difference between clinicians and peers, and, you know, and what rankings people are. At the end of the day, we are just a group of people who come together to try and help the people that we're working with, and we work together to try and get the best outcome for the people that we look after.
Yeah, there's a lot of respect for one another, and because we see the value in each other, we've seen them at work. So trust is gained that way, and respect is given there.
Yeah.
Let's get that one. So look, there's a real simplicity in what we're talking about. I mean, this is not rocket science. I mean, we've all got our anxieties and concerns and all that. But like Matt said, that understanding and trust. How did we get there? Because we talked. And by talking and listening, we got to the point where, you know, we are a really good integrated and multidisciplinary team. So ultimately, yeah, it's about that respect. And we're all here doing a job, and yeah, it works. Righto.
Thank you very much, guys. I'm assuming you've now finished your presentation. Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Alan. Really well done. When we close this, we're actually going to leave it open for you to be able to go through the chat section afterwards, because there's lots and lots of comments and positive things that I think you guys should have a look at, really. So yeah, I'll leave that up at the end of this. But I have got lots of questions, but before I do that, I'll just see if I've got any in the room, because I'm aware that we are coming to 11 o'clock, so some people will have to rush off. Has anyone in the room got any questions before I go to the online ones? No, Jim, no, not today. No, good. In which case I will go to the online ones, and we've had lots, so I'm not going to get through all of them. Apologies for that. We'll start with a simple one. Straight up, you put up a diagram that showed your team. Somebody asked, are the psychologists in your team clinical psychologists or just psychologists? Nice, easy one to start with, if you know that.
So, because it's actually an allied health position, so they're HB4. So I think Matt's endorsed.
Gotcha.
But we only got one at the moment because the other one's vacant because of maternity leave. So, yeah.
No worries.
I think I should know, but I don't. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't, you know, I to be honest with you, it's about what they do rather than what qualification they hold. I agree with you 100%, Alan. You also, talking about that flat structure that you have for your multidisciplinary team. So somebody's asked, do peer workers get involved with the development of the service, recruitment of the service? And somebody else has also asked, do you see a future where peer workers could actually end up being team leaders in services?
Ooh. Well, Matt was on my panel when they interviewed for the peer.
So that answers that one. They certainly get involved with the recruitment and development of the service, which I think is a positive. Do you see a future where peer workers are, I don't want to say validated enough, but you know, they're taken seriously enough that they would be taken as team leaders or, you know, running services?
I definitely hope that's the direction that we're moving in.
It's my job threatened.
Definitely.
I don't want to lose you, Alan. Thank you. Someone else has asked about the division between alcohol and drug and mental health when it comes to peer workers. Do you think it's important that the peers are specific to the service that you're at? So obviously your primary focus is an AOD service. Or do you think that because the issues are so intertwined, it's not that important whether the peer worker has previous mental health or AOD? Does that make sense? Hopefully it did.
I think you have to have an experience in, you know, with AOD in order, you know, to really be of benefit to the people that are coming through our doors. However, that doesn't mean that, you know, our experiences don't kind of blend into the way of mental health as well. I think that, you know, the two are very closely aligned. But I think you should, I think from a peer's perspective with us, our outlook is more on AOD.
Sure, that makes sense.
Certainly, one of the things that we have here, and this is with the clinicians coming on board as well that have come from other areas, it's saying we always have to put the AOD glasses on.
Yeah.
So wherever you're working, you have to wear the right glasses so that we're looking at it from an alcohol and drug perspective, firstly.
Yeah. Thank you, Alan. Do you have peer workers assigned to clients, or is it that any peer worker in your service can engage with any client that's attending your service? Does that?
So We have young people that are allocated to us, and that's discussed over the morning meetings, you know, who is the best fit, whether that's, you know, gender or experience or age, whatever. But yeah, it's that decision's made at the morning meetings, who would be the best fit for that person.
Cool.
And some clients only want to engage a peer worker, so yeah, it's a necessity.
Yeah. Which is, you know, again, highlights how important your roles are in the service.
Yeah, and what's changed from the start, I think early on it was like that the peer was going to see all the people that came through the service, which devalued their role a little bit, whereas now we're more specific about it because we really value the role that they play. Therefore, it should be specific to where they get in and play.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense, Alan. The new clients in your unit get taught the difference between peer workers and clinicians. Generally, what's the response when that happens? And I know you've shared some of that. And the flip side is you showed a survey of what the clinicians, I think it was, thought of the peer service. Do you actually do a survey afterwards to see what the client's experience of having peer workers on hand was for them?
Kind of feedback we've received. I haven't given any sheets for clients to fill out personally, but the feedback will come in a variety of ways.
Certainly.
Either through their parents or carers, or they say outrightly how it's gone for them.
Yeah.
And we'd all sort of say how we work, because when we introduce ourselves based on who we are and what we do. So yeah, so there is that transparency with that as well.
Yeah.
I guess quite an important one. Lots of people have been keen to, you know, obviously looking at having a similar system of peer workers in their services, and some are even in the process of developing this as it goes on. So we've had questions such as what supervision or support and training is available for your peer workers in comparison to maybe some of the clinicians that are working there?
So with the supervision for us, so because Matt and I are the only peers in the AOD sector at the moment, we do a lot of, you know, debriefing with each other, and we do a lot of talking together. However, we do have a peer supervisor that has just kind of come on board, so that will be available for us soon. And also, you know, Al is very open to us, you know, seeking supervision where we think we'll get benefit from it.
Yeah, and you're able to engage in training the same as anyone else that's working for Q Health to access any of the stuff that's available to us, I assume.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And Matt's actually been able to mentor, do a mentorship with some other people that have wanted to come in and have a look. So certainly we're open for other peers within the health area to just come and spend time with the guys.
Cool. Well, I was going to say, one of my questions was going to be, you know, for people that are looking up to set up services, can they contact you guys for, you know, some more in-depth information? And I guess that kind of answers that. If you're basically saying you're willing for people to come and have a look at your service, definitely. How would they get in touch with you, Alan, for that?
Oh, they'd have to contact Gemma.
Nicely done. So just contact the ladder service. Is that what we're saying for that? Yeah.
Yeah. No, they can contact me directly.
Building on from that supervision and training, the next question was, what protects your peer workers? What structures are in place to actually protect the peer workers regarding clinical governance and that?
Look, the big thing is, because we're a close team and that respectful team, what's the real protection for the guys is that they feel comfortable to talk to any of the staff, and they'll go and have a chat. So we certainly got that as one thing. So it's a supportive environment. The other one is with the conferencing process, so that at that point in time, if there's somebody that we identify as a little bit high in risk, then they will be having a joint between the peer and a clinician. Yeah. We certainly identify the ones that may need that little bit more protection, I suppose, from a governance point of view. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. that makes sense. Important question, I guess, and one that I hadn't thought of, so thanks for the people that put these in. When your peers are engaging with their clients, or the people that are attending your service, has it ever been an issue where the peer themselves has had an issue because they've been discussed maybe bringing up some old stuff that's re-triggered stuff with them? Has there ever been an issue with that, and if so, how would you manage that situation?
Not necessarily. Well,
there was that lady.
There's been an occasion or two, yes, and Al's just reminded me of a certain lady. I was able to really give a good handover to Al. He was really supportive, and I was able to get a lot off my chest and just recalibrate, I guess, and see it from a third perspective.
Definitely.
Being in the moment where everyone knows when things get emotive for them, and you might not be outwardly showing it, but you feel like you might be, you're in the engagement side of things, and things that might feel a bit negative. However, I was able to express and explain the situation where I felt like I was being negative to this person, but outwardly and thankfully I had a witness, a colleague who was there as well, who was very supportive and didn't see any of the negative stuff that I was obviously feeling at the time. So I was able to deal with the situation through my colleagues and through Al.
And that was more around transference, counter-transference at that point in time.
Yeah. And I think that shows the value of having a team that you feel safe and supportive with, and how that does allow you to, it doesn't have to be a formal debrief session, but just having that feeling that you can actually feel safe and, talk to someone that was there at the time and see if they see things the same as you did at the time. Thank you for sharing that, Matt. That's, kind of vital. What advice would you give another service that was thinking of introducing peers? And please say don't do it. Please don't say don't do it, because we want more of this.
And I think for them to experience things firsthand, they need to go to an organisation and sit with the team and get the feedback that way, and also maybe be a part of the team for a day and just see how things are done, see how people relate. It's really, I come from a mental health background as well, so I know things were well established there, and it's a well-oiled machine. But in the AOD, it's been pretty new, and we have had to, there's been a little bit of maintenance here and there, but it's working really well. So now that it's working really well, I think we're the great example for people to come and have a look and sit in and see it face to face with themselves if they're serious about getting peer involvement. And because, we're a bit biased being peer workers, we think to have a real multidisciplinary team, you need to have that peer involvement as well.
Yeah, thank you.
The other one I'd recommend is if an organisation is thinking about doing it, I'd recommend have a look at the stretch to engage, because it will give them a model for them to work on, to really ask the questions and spend the time getting a good understanding of what they want to do and why they want to do it, and not just do it because they can.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. I think that's important. And listen, I've got loads more, but I think we probably need to think about wrapping up, just because I know people have got clinics and other things to go off to. Quickly, somebody's asked, what's the referral process to get somebody into ladders?
Give us a call, send us an email.
Thank you.
Yeah, pretty walk in. Yeah, you don't need a direct referral. Probably give us a call. It's probably the best one if someone's thinking about wanting to make a referral.
And very quickly, someone's also just added at the end, you obviously work closely with the clients that are in your service. Does that also extend out to carers, families, that sort of thing? Do the peers get involved in that process as well?
Can do, and we have.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you. I figured it would. Well, listen, this is really exciting. Like Matt, I've got, a long history in mental health where this is, well established, but it's really exciting to see a service that's taken this upon themselves and is actually doing something very positive with it. And I hope that everybody that's tuned in and watching will learn from this and try and introduce similar into the services that they're in, because I think it's a valuable thing. And I think it's also a valuable thing to acknowledge that we also have lots of clinicians that also have their own personal stories, as Alan has mentioned. And so some of us are already carrying, some of that, and it's having confidence to be able to be open about those sort of things as well, to reduce the stigma associated with what our clients are often dealing with. So I want to say a big thank you to all three of you, to Alan, Gemma and to Matt, for the time that you've taken to not only put it together, but also to present it so thoroughly. So thank you very much for that indeed.